President Bola Tinubu has pledged his readiness to break the vicious cycle of over-reliance on borrowing for public spending and the resulting burden of debt servicing it places on the management of Nigeria's limited revenues. Tinubu spoke while inaugurating the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. He mandated the committee to improve the country's revenue profile and business environment as the federal government, moved to achieve 18% tax to gross domestic product ratio targets within the next 3 years. The president directed the committee, headed by tax expert Taiwo Oyedele, to endeavor to achieve its one-year mandate, which was divided into 3 main areas: fiscal, governance, tax reforms, and growth facilitation. We're now being joined by Dr. Ifediora Amobi, an economist and World Bank consultant, for a quick chat around alternatives to infrastructure funding as the president looks to wean Nigeria off borrowing. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday this afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So, Dr. Ifediora, what alternatives do we have for financing our infrastructure in this economy?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've done in the past has been to borrow. And with a debt stock profile hitting more than 50 trillion naira, according to the DMO, that is not sustainable. So the present government should be looking at various alternatives. One alternative would be to engage in public-private partnerships with, partners interested in investing in infrastructure in the various infrastructural sections or sectors of the economy. And so you have roads, you have bridges, you have water, you have power, you have communications, you have housing, etc. The list is actually, quite exhaustive. And so, PPP arrangements are usually, one of the very, very viable alternatives to borrowing when it comes to financing infrastructural projects. Another alternative that the government can explore, which to some degree is not particularly the most popular, is to print more money to finance the. But we all know the implications of printing money, which have inflationary consequences. But those could also be managed. One of the things that printing money does, it increases, the demand for existing resources. But if that demand can be controlled, through other fiscal and monetary policies, then we can actually print and regulate what is being printed, where the money goes into. That's another alternative. Government can also look at, the President Bola Tinubu has explored what he wants to do with FIRS and partnering with the markets, etc. And so that could be another alternative. So when you actually expand the tax base, you also increase the chances to generate more revenue for the government. And so these are some alternatives. There's also others that include increased marketing. Nigeria has to be marketed. The potentials are enormous. Marketing Nigeria, ensuring that foreign direct investment comes into the country, is also another way of having investors take up some of these infrastructure projects as investments, and then also give government the chance to achieve that objective. So, there are certain alternatives and options that the government can explore to achieve this goal.
Well, Dr. Federer, I would like us to speak a bit more about the public-private partnerships to boost infrastructure funding. There is a belief that in most cases in Nigeria, it is the politicians who benefit from this arrangement, rather than genuine business people and service providers. So how can we change that narrative? Make the process more transparent? How can that be done?
Well, that's why we have institutions like the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission, NIPC, that monitors that aspect of, government policy. Then ICRC, the Infrastructure Concession and Regulatory Agency, Commission, is another institution that has done very, very well in the past. And so if these two institutions, for instance, are strengthened further, I think they will have the capacity to really, move the country to the next level when it comes to, public-private partnerships, etc. At the state levels, most states also have investment promotion agencies that partner with the NIPC at the federal level. And so, there is a good relationship between the federal and the states. Projects coming into the states that also have PPP components can, have that support from the federal. Whether it benefits politicians, if that had happened in the past, a lot of that can be corrected, because when you have weak institutions, people and other smaller institutions take advantage of that gap. And so strengthening them will go a long way in ensuring that, that it's not just the politicians or the rich that benefit from it, but also, it trickles down to every segment of the population.
And with this economy, is it even possible for us to wean ourselves from borrowing at this time?
Well, we can't completely wean ourselves from borrowing. We could actually reduce what we borrow. Every country needs funding. Borrowing is a key aspect of achieving economic development goals, objectives, and ensuring that projects are executed on time and on budget. And so, yes, we still need to borrow. However, we have to also, imbibe this mindset of borrowing to invest. And so before we borrow, we have to make sure that what we're borrowing and what we're putting it into has a positive rate of return that will ensure that, that when it's time to pay back, we have the necessary funds required to pay back that, that loan, as well as have a reasonable return on that investment that will benefit the country.
Now, Dr. Federer, earlier on, you talked about increased marketing, but I'm wondering that with issues of insecurity, hostile business environment, and so on, how easy will it be to market Nigeria, with all these issues still in existence?
Well, it's not the easiest thing to do. However, we have to know, we know that Nigeria has a tremendous potential with our huge market, with our skilled workforce, with the incentives that, the federal government is putting in place or has in place already that investors are aware of. We should be able to, project this at the global stage, ensure that other investors outside the shores of Nigeria, and even Nigerians that are doing, good business outside Nigeria, can reinvest, back at home. And so, like I mentioned NIPC earlier on, and NIPC has a very, very, good marketing and investment package for investors. Working with the Ease of Doing Business office that used to be part of, PEBEC and the Office of the Vice President, with the support of the World Bank and other development partners, We just have to ensure that our internal processes are streamlined. We have to ensure that the timing it takes to deliver internally, both at the state level and at the federal level, is also enhanced so that time becomes a very, very crucial resource when it comes to making investment decisions. We also have to work on our rent-seeking, character, and by that I mean this, thing about, oh, what's in it for me, or put something on the table before a decision can be made, or taking money here and there under the table and through the back doors. If we can overcome that and just know that we are working in the interest of the country and ensuring that other investors and people outside the country have confidence that they are going to be dealing with professionals and everything will be above board when they come to Nigeria, that will go a long way in ensuring that our ease of business ranking improves. So cutting down on red tape, working on the costs, ensuring that that we deliver on time. Those are the things that will endure us to ensuring that that investors do come in, and the potential is there. We can do it.
And curbing corruption, being more efficient, these are all things in a utopia that we want to actually achieve. But we know how the reality of the situation tends to be. These things take some time in order to wrest out the poison from a system that has been functioning that way for a while. But earlier you were talking about printing more money, right? And you said that it still could lead to inflation, but could you tell us how it could possibly be managed?
Well, I used the phrase, print and regulate. And so we're not just going to be printing money for printing's sake and throwing it into the economy and increasing the money supply and ensuring that prices go up, etc. We are going to print for specific investment purposes or infrastructure funding purposes, that have been well thought through. And I'll give you an instance, and this is just an arbitrary instance. Let's assume that that we have 100 investment resources, yeah, and this could be a mixed bag of people, money, etc. And out of those 100, 10 is owned by government and 90 is controlled by the private sector. And so we want to now increase that by printing money. Now, these resources are actually, if demand for these resources go up, this leads to inflation. This is, a typical price increase scenario. Now, if government wants to increase from 10 to 20, they can go out and borrow money and then achieve that. If they want to print money, they can do that, but ensure that 10 resources from the private sector side are subdued. So the private sector doesn't have that opportunity to invest that 10 units like it would do the other 90 it has. So at the end of the day, you now have government now borrows 10, government has 20, and the private sector's own resource capacity is reduced from 90 to 80. So we still maintain that 100. So we still have 100 resources that were in the economy in the first place, which could now curb that demand and control inflation. It's just an arbitrary scenario. However, when this is thought through by a team of experts and brainstormed, it can actually lead to some real solutions that the country can apply.
Dr. Efediora, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on increasing taxation? Some believe this is an option that can also be used to boost infrastructure funding in Nigeria.
Yes, most definitely. Increasing taxation is always an option. However, if you look at the Nigerian scenario whereby the average Nigerian is already overtaxed from, some of the policies that have been introduced over the past, 2 or 3 months, that could be a tall order. What we can do, as opposed to an outright increase in taxation, is to expand the tax base to ensure that more segments of the population are now included within the tax base and the tax bracket and within that tax basket. So instead of increasing taxes from 5 to 10%, you can increase the people who are taxable from 10 million to 20 to 30 million and get more revenue without necessarily increasing the tax rate. So there are always various ways and various options one can actually look at these things, and government can apply them.
There's also the taxation of the high net worth individuals or those who are earning a lot. But with concessional financing and local currency lending, are these things that we employ already? What would be the benefits versus the risks if not?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the introduction, and I know this has actually been thought about in past governments, an introduction of what's called a luxury tax, on the rich and super rich. Most of these segments are even the ones that, default on taxes. We have lots of people who are classified millionaires and billionaires within Nigeria that throw money around, at every occasion and function and event and so on. But then they don't pay adequate taxation from their wealth. So, an instance whereby FIRS, for instance, can be able to monitor and capture these rich and super rich individuals or even self-made millionaires from the private sector and in the informal sector, because there are so many of them in the informal sector. If there could be a way of registering now or capturing them and their revenue, then government can actually be able to tax them adequately and minimize the tax burden on the medium and not so affluent, Nigerians and government workers who actually get taxes deducted from their salaries on a monthly basis.
Now, I'm wondering, where does the money saved from removing all subsidy fit into this scenario? We know right now there's talk on cushioning the impact of fuel subsidy removal, but how can the revenue freed up from the removal of this of the oil subsidy also be utilized to boost infrastructure funding? Won't it be counterproductive if we're using the revenue instead to cushion the effect of removing the subsidy?
Not necessarily. And I say that because transportation is also part of infrastructure. And so if the money saved from the removal of subsidy can go into the transport sector to improve mass transit, to improve our road network, to provide buses and rail, etc., then that is also infrastructure financing. And so, yes, money saved from that, if it's channeled to that sector, while other forms of financing can go into other aspects of infrastructure provision, like housing and power, etc., then that will also be a positive thing that the government can do for the people.
So where should this new administration and the government, where exactly do they need to be focusing the most intense gaze in order to get these to work?
My first priority would be in the transport sector. And the reason I say that is because it has, ripple effects It's not just transport, it's also, market prices, because part of what increases part of the price increase that we have actually experienced since the removal of subsidy on petroleum has been high transport costs. And so anything that will go into ensuring that that is brought down, because it will now not only make food and other commodity prices cheaper, it will now make it affordable for people to get to their places of employment, and move around, etc. And so that, for me, should be the top priority. Once that is done and is successful, there'll be less tension both on the people and on government to now take it to the next level or the next phase, which can now be either providing adequate power or now working on the roads, and so on. However, I'm also a strong believer that simultaneous development is also the best approach. We can't wait until one thing is done before we go into the next. Things have to be done simultaneously, and development has to be integrated so that everybody is carried along at the same level. It might not be as rapid as we want it to, but at least we can see progress and we can follow it up as we develop as a country.
So, Dr. Federer, considering Nigeria's economic reality, the high inflation rate, the scarcity of the dollar, or shall I say the high rate of the dollar, and so many other economic difficulties that we are facing in Nigeria, how do you think we can boost foreign investment into our economy?
Well, the only thing we can do, and the only thing I think we can do is to ensure that the environment that enables investment to grow and thrive is enabled, what we call an enabling environment. We have to make sure that those basic things, besides the ease of doing business indicators that we look at, registering a business and registering property and enforcing contracts and the rest of them, those ones are the basic things. Those things have to be put in place. Investors only come to where they can, get return on the investment, one. Two, where they can, operate without as much restrictions as possible, to a place where those basic things like power and roads and so on is available, where the workforce is skilled and educated, where they can balance their, work-life activities. There are various things that we have to look at. So before we even say, investors come in, let us know exactly what they want. Let us study, let us say, okay, well, if these are the things that attract them, let us take care of these ones internally first. And that's why I talked about, corruption and under the table, because the perception out there for doing business in Nigeria has to change. When you talk to foreigners and even some other Africans about coming into Nigeria, there's this skepticism at first because, they have this negative feeling. So we have to work towards that. And it has to come from us, from everybody. From the security agencies to the institutions, to government itself, to the people. We have to start believing that we can get things done without being induced one way or the other.
Well, Dr. Ifediora Amobi, thank you so much for this conversation that you've had with us on this.